From blood-soaked battlefields whose historic buildings harbor all manner of artifacts and associated restless spirits, to weathered graveyards whose aged rows are roamed by ghostly manifestations after dark, are you sure you're ready to brave our picks for some of the most haunted places in Maryland? Number 5. The National Museum of Civil War Medicine. The National Museum of Civil War Medicine, which is located off of East Patrick Street out of Frederick, Maryland, is a historic educational institution that's widely recognized as the leading center for research regarding medical innovation through the American Civil War. Historically, the museum's accommodating structure would initially, in 1832, serve as a furniture and undertaking business under James and Anne Whitehill. Through the Civil War, the town of Frederick would play host to a range of both sick and injured soldiers, and in 1862, an embalming station headed under Dr. Richard Burr would take up residence on site. Following the conflict, one Clarence C. Carty would acquire the building, which would continue to sell its furniture alongside offering end-of-life services. Through the 1890s, the property's original store was demolished and replaced with a modernized version, and in 1924, the premises was expanded into the campus that we know today. In 1971, Dr. Gordon E. Damon, DDS, and his wife Karen would begin amassing a collection of Civil War-era medical artifacts. However, over time, this amassment would far surpass the level of your standard hobbyists, and in 1990, the National Museum of Civil War Medicine was incorporated. Predating the existence of the museum itself, this institution would begin holding conferences on Civil War medicine. However, by 1996, they would initially begin hosting their operation out of an earlier house, and in the year 2000 would open their site in the Carty building. The National Museum of Civil War Medicine remains open into the present, offering a gift shop, a range of exhibitions and events, options in both guided and self-guided tours, and, according to legend and to literally no one's surprise, a range of restless spirits tied to its various artifacts and to the countless associated soldiers who died so long ago, with those frequenting the expanse telling of disembodied footsteps heard from empty spaces, of phantom voices and whispers carried on the winds, and of both orbs and spook lights visible to the naked eye and also captured on camera. A friendly ghost, who it's believed belongs to a former worker named Tom, is rumored to stalk the elevator and has been known to make it shoot up and down to random floors, while a long-standing staff rule dictates employees aren't allowed to change light bulbs alone, due to an incident in which a staff member standing on a ladder had his step kicked out from under him by someone or something unseen. A handful of informal investigations of the expanse have yielded high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, and objects recorded moving around on their own, while others have described the smells of cooking food with no source, and the constant feelings of being watched, of being followed, or even of being brushed up against by an invisible person or persons. Lastly, an ominous lady in black has been spied walking down the same hall night after night, before disappearing through an adjacent wall. Number 4. The Antietam National Battlefield. The Antietam National Battlefield, which is located on East Main Street off of Antietam Creek out of Sharpsburg, Maryland, is a National Park Service protected expanse preserving the site of the bloodiest single-day battle in the whole of American history. Historically, on September 17th of 1862, the Battle of Antietam, or the Battle of Sharpsburg, was fought through the American Civil War between Confederate General Robert E. Lee of Northern Virginia and Union General George B. McClellan's Army of the Potomac. When all was said and done, a combined tally of 22,720 would lie dead, mortally wounded, or missing, earning it the infamous aforementioned moniker of being literally the bloodiest day in American history. In 1865, the Antietam National Cemetery, which adjoins the park and now accommodates over 4,976 interments, was commissioned, with burials starting in 1867. In 1890, the Antietam National Battlefield site was formally established. In 1933, its ownership was transferred from the War Department to the National Park Service, and in 1962, the park would welcome its Visitors Center, which continues to offer a range of museum exhibits, artifacts, and educational materials. In 1989, the memorial illumination was started and persists through the first Saturday of December annually. During this ceremony, over 1,000 volunteers placed 23,000 luminaries across the northern end of the battlefield in honor of the many brave men who were lost so long ago. In the present, the Antietam National Battlefield remains open to the public, offering its visitor center, the Pry House Field Hospital, the Dunker Church, its National Cemetery, a park library, and more. Now this next part probably goes without saying, but legends spanning back to just days following the battle up into more modern times claim the whole of these quite literally blood-soaked grounds harbor the spirits of the countless lives extinguished across them, and both visitors and staff to the expanse have reported a range of paranormal activity, including the phantom sounds of gunfire and artillery, the melody of old-timey war music accompanied by the beat of drums, and encounters with a host of spectral soldiers often locked in scenes of combat, especially right near Bloody Lane, where a ghostly troop of Confederates has been observed seemingly preparing for a charge unseen. At Burnside's bridge, and following multiple shutdowns and setbacks, General Ambrose Burnside managed to push through the Confederate horde. His push did not come without its price, however, and as men fell left and right, they were buried hastily around the crossing in unmarked graves. Those who have explored the bridge after dark have told of a blue ball of light that drips about for moments, often accompanied by a lone drumbeat. The Piper House, which is located smack dab in the middle of the battlefield itself, would serve as headquarters to Confederate General Longstreet, while its barn would serve as a field hospital. And across the whole of its grounds, disembodied voices, bootsteps, and encounters with a black, smoky manifestation are all but common. Lastly, the Pry House would also serve as a hospital through the battle, after which, for years, the property would be utilized as storage, until 1976, when it caught fire, resulting in around a third of it being entirely gutted for modernizations and restorations. During this process, a host of odd occurrences were documented under various unrelated work crews, and to date, many who have braved it have told of doors slamming on their own, of footsteps heard from the empty stair, and of encounters with the apparition of a woman in period clothing, who it's believed was the wife of one of the generals who died within the residence. Number 3. Fort McHenry. Fort McHenry, or officially the Fort McHenry National Monument and Historic Shrine, which is located off of East Fort Avenue out of Baltimore, Maryland, is a historical American coastal pentagonal bastion fort widely recognized as the birthing place of the national anthem, that boasts the title of being the only national monument and historic shrine owned and operated under the National Park Service. Historically, through the American Revolutionary War, a humble star-shaped earthen defense recognized as Fort Whetstone was constructed on site. In 1798, Whetstone would welcome an extensive upgrade and expansion, and in 1803, what ended up being basically an entirely different defense was established as Fort McHenry. Amidst the War of 1812, on September 13th of 1814, for 25 hours straight, Fort McHenry would endure a brutal bombardment courtesy of the British Navy. On the following morning of September 14th, when the smoke had cleared, the stalwart Continental defenders would stand strong, resulting in British forces withdrawing. Incidentally, it was during this battle that Francis Scott Key, who was essentially being held prisoner on a truce ship by the British, who feared the prominent lawyer would return to the mainland and inform his side of their numbers, was inspired while playing witness to the savage assault to write a poem called The Defense of Fort McHenry, which was later placed to music as, you guessed it, the Star-Spangled Banner. Through the Civil War, McHenry would serve as a military prison and would hold both Confederate soldiers and Maryland politicians suspected of being sympathizers. Through World War I, it would serve as a hospital site. In 1925, the Age Defense was listed as a national park, and in 1939, it was designated a national monument and historic shrine, with limited military use actually continuing up through World War II. In the present, Fort McHenry remains open to the public, offering a range of educational programs, countless annual events and activities, and much, much more. Chillingly, and according to a range of ghost stories and eyewitness accounts, fort grounds are rumored to harbor the spirits of the many soldiers who died across them, and those braving the site have reported a range of ghostly men in both British and Continental uniforms, the entities of Confederates and their supporters of the era, and perturbing instances in which spectral feet can be spied dangling right near where the old gallows used to lie. Through the Revolution, Bastion 3, or Claggett's Bastion, was hit by a British bomb, killing 1 soldier and 1 Lieutenant Levi Claggett, after whom the space derives its moniker. Over the years, an apparition bearing a likeness to Claggett has been spied around the area, seemingly either going about tasks from life or locked in scenes of battle no longer visible to the living. Also reported throughout McHenry are disembodied footsteps detected from empty rooms and halls, voices carried on the winds, and extreme cold spots. The figure of a woman in a Victorian-era dress has been spied gazing from windows at passersby. Lights on site have a habit of turning on and off by themselves. Extreme cold spots are felt in adverse weather, and odd knocking has been heard seemingly emanating from within the walls. Another popular legend intertwines with actual history to tell of Private John Drew, a soldier held within the fort's prison through the 1880s, who, distraught and ashamed with himself, managed to snag a guard's weapon that was set down too close to his cell, before using it to end his own life. Ever since this fateful night, a spectral soldier bearing a likeness to Drew has been sighted both within his old cell and also pacing the area that he was found sleeping on his post, which incidentally resulted in his punishment. Lastly, a sorrowful woman in white who it's believed is the spirit of a wife of a non-commissioned officer assigned to the fort and whose children perished through a 1920s epidemic has been observed drifting about and has even purportedly been responsible for throwing several down the stairs and even knocking a handful of others out cold. Number 2. Westminster Hall and Burying Grounds. Westminster Hall and Burying Grounds, which is located off of the corner of West Fayette and North Green Streets out of downtown Baltimore, Maryland, is a former church and graveyard renowned for its interment of a range of significant figures, including the likes of one of the masters of horror himself, Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. Historically, through January of 1787, a burying grounds was established on site in order to hold the remains of local parishioners. Over the following 6 decades, the expanse would welcome the interments of a number of notable figures, and through July of 1852, the Westminster Presbyterian Church was erected over top of the old cemetery, with its brick piers literally straddling markers, tombs, and vaults, while simultaneously creating the zone now recognized locally as the Catacombs. While this church would thrive for several decades, through the early 1900s it would suffer a massive loss of its congregants, many of whom ended up moving elsewhere to suburbs or the outer city limits. And as this pattern continued over the years, by 1977 the organization would be forced to disband entirely, with the Westminster Preservation Trust Incorporated established later the same year in order to maintain the weathered property. In the present, Westminster Hall and Burying Grounds remain open to the public and are a popular locale for weddings, receptions, events, lectures, conferences, and the like. Coming as no surprise, being that it's both a disturbed graveyard and, more importantly, featured on our list, Westminster has long been surrounded in tales of encounters with the otherworldly, and those who have braved its bounds have reported shadowy figures that stalk lone visitors, accounts of objects sighted moving around on their own, and strange wisps of either smoke or mist that drift through the yard with seeming sentience. Several informal investigations of the expanse have yielded high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, and orbs in the backgrounds of photography and video, while others have detailed encounters with the ghost of a white-haired elderly man who's usually observed seemingly searching through markers, with the bothered spirit of a former groundskeeper who's been known to chase the living off, namely those not showing proper respect, with a shovel, and with the crazed and even threatening entity of an insane woman who it's claimed was buried in her straitjacket, and whose manic laughter is often heard through the dark of the catacombs. The specter of 16-year-old Lucia Watson Taylor, who met her fate in 1816, has been viewed kneeling and praying at her own marker, her long dark hair covering her face and draping down to a luminous white gown, while odd documentations tell of the skull of Cambridge, which is literally a decapitated head from an unnamed murdered minister, screaming persistently at all hours of the night, and with such frequency that it was eventually encased in cement and reburied for good measure. One of the yard's most famous stories tells of how, sometime through the mid-19th century, 2 students from Davidge Hall, or the College of Medicine of Maryland, were caught stealing Westminster bodies, after which, when their peers found out, a mob was formed, and one of the body snatchers was hanged as punishment. The ghost of this body snatcher has been sighted either casing gravesites, or twitching and writhing as he swings by the neck from a rope that shoots straight up through the darkness, seemingly into time and space itself. regarding the curious 1849 passing of the late great Edgar Allan Poe. It's documented that the legendary writer was discovered wandering the streets in clothing that didn't belong to him, feverish and delirious, just after departing the Horse You Came In On saloon, which happened to be a favorite haunt of his. While he was taken swiftly to the hospital, Poe would pass on a few nights later, and to this day, many suspect foul play was involved in his untimely fate. Initially, his remains were laid to rest within Westminster in an unmarked grave, which, as one can imagine, has been significantly upgraded since, and it's believed his soul, or at least a piece of it, may linger about. An apparition bearing a likeness to Poe that's usually clad in a long black coat and wide-brimmed black fedora with a black scarf covering his face has been spied standing solemnly in front of his own grave, and has even been known to leave such items as red roses or bottles of his favorite cognac behind on the anniversary of his passing. Number 1. The United States Naval Academy. The United States Naval Academy, or USNA, which is located off of Blake Road out of Annapolis, Maryland, is a federal service academy holding the title of being the second oldest of the 5 U.S. service academies in existence. Historically, in 1753, it's documented that land now hosting the academy was owned under the Delaney family. In 1776, both the family and city of Annapolis would contribute land for the construction of an American Revolutionary War fort, and in 1808, this earlier fort was replaced by Fort Severn. In 1845, Severn would see transfer to the Secretary of the Navy, George Bancroft, and would transform the campus into a naval school. In 1850, the institution would be incorporated as the United States Naval Academy, and in 1854, the site would host the Academy's first graduating class. Through the Civil War, the Academy's student and teacher bases would choose sides, during which time the expanse would be utilized as a field hospital, and following the war, school life would continue on as normal, with the Academy expanding rapidly. In 1933, Congress would expand school capabilities to award Bachelors of Science degrees, and more recently, in 1976, the Academy would accept its first women as midshipmen, following Congress's authorization of female branch members being allowed into all service academies. The United States Naval Academy remains open into the present, offering its state-of-the-art facility and training regimens to midshipmen from all walks of life, alongside its Armel Leftwich Visitor Center, which is absolutely packed with memorabilia, artifacts, and educational materials geared towards any with an interest. Over its lengthy existence, the USNA has been shrouded in a range of chilling ghost stories perpetuated by generations of students, faculty, and officials alike, with reports of encounters detailing extreme cold spots felt in adverse weather, instances of doorknobs turning or rattling on their own, or of doors opening and closing by themselves, run-ins with an unseen, malevolent presence that's attempted to push several down various flights of stairs, and a range of full-bodied apparitions in both clothing and uniform spanning back centuries. Through the early 18th century, the region surrounding the original fort was wrought with piracy, prostitution, taverns, criminals, and more. And perturbingly, those captured living outside of the law were often punished by way of being hanged out in cages in the opening to the harbor, to expire under the elements, as a warning to all other privateers and those who might consider attacking this stalwart defense. Another popular story that ties itself to actual history tells of Captain John Paul Jones, who, in 1779, fought against a superior British ship and managed to win the battle despite his own ship sinking. In 1792, Jones would pass on in Paris to illness, after which his body was moved a number of times before finally, on January 26th of 1913, being laid to rest in the lower level of the Naval Academy's chapel. Now, students and staff claim that in times of need, the apparition of the legendary war hero himself has been known to manifest in the realm of the living to offer his advice. Additionally, several traversing chapel grounds have reported hearing the phrases, "Where am I?" and "What's your name, soldier?" muttered from thin air. And near the prestigious crypt bearing John's name, many have told of electronic malfunctions, of strange orbs, and of ectoplasm captured in photography and video, and of a mysterious figure who lingers for moments before fading away. A final, rather disturbing tale tells of Naval Academy Lieutenant James Sutton, who in 1907 was killed under rather suspicious circumstances. On the night of his death, Sutton had shared a taxi cab with 3 other officers, all of whom were heading back to the academy. It's documented in reports of the era that the other 3 officers ordered the cab to stop, pulled James from the car, and just as the cab was pulling away, that the driver heard a gunshot but wasn't able to see what happened. Later, the 3 officers accompanying James would claim that he went crazy, grabbed for a gun, and shot himself suddenly. And while literally not a single soul bought this alibi, lacking sufficient evidence, no one was ever charged for the serviceman's murder. Now, it's believed the vengeful soul of Sutton, restless over his unresolved fate, remains. And an entity bearing his likeness has been sighted across campus, usually right near Bancroft Hall, where the spectral lieutenant has been known to wake sleeping officers through the night with a luminous, soul-piercing stare. Taking its fascinating and highly significant history into account, and coupling it with such a perturbing and astonishing range of associated ghost stories and purported encounters with the unknown, we felt the United States Naval Academy was a perfect choice as the most haunted place in Maryland. Thanks for joining us for our picks for some of the most haunted places in Maryland. If you enjoyed listening to our histories and ghost stories, subscribe to our channel, like this upload, and share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. We'll catch you all next time.